The controversial congressional memo that's been stealing the headlines in recent weeks has now been released after receiving approval from the US president. It accuses the FBI and Justice Department of securing a warrant to spy on Donald Trump's presidential campaign based on the unverified claims in the Trump-Russia Steele dossier, which was paid for by the Democrats.
I think it's terrible. You want to know the truth? I think it's a disgrace. What's going on in this country, I think it's a disgrace. The memo was sent to Congress. It was declassified. Congress will do whatever they're going to do. But I think it's a disgrace what's happening in our country. And when you look at that and you see that and so many other things, what's going on, a lot of people should be ashamed of themselves, and much worse than that.
Well, if you take a look at the 4-page memo that there was so much anticipation of, you'll be coming across some rather interesting facts. Now, the Christopher Steele dossier, this was the basis on which the FBI acquired their warrant under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, their warrant to wiretap members of the Trump campaign. It was based on the infamous dossier from Christopher Steele. Now, we also know that the FBI chief said that it was salacious and unverified. Furthermore, the FBI was aware that the DNC and the Hillary Clinton Foundation paid roughly $160,000 for the Steele dossier. They knew it was paid for by the DNC, but they did not mention that in their applications for a warrant from FISA courts. Furthermore, Christopher Steele wasn't only working for the Democrats. Christopher Steele was a longtime paid FBI informant. And the Department of Justice and the FBI were well aware of the fact that Christopher Steele had an agenda against Trump, was quite biased. They still used the report. Furthermore, we know that the Deputy Attorney General Bruce Orr, his wife, was actually hired by Fusion GPS, the firm that the Democrats hired in order to get this information on Trump. So essentially, this document points to the fact that there was a great deal of what appears to be collusion between the Clinton campaign and the FBI and Department of Justice, two entities that are essentially supposed to be bipartisan enforcers of U.S. law. It appears, according to this document, or at least it's purported in this document, that they were working to prevent the election of Donald Trump. And we heard many calls from many prominent figures for this document to remain classified. They wanted this 4 pages to be not in the perspective and not available to the American public. Remember, Nancy Pelosi, the leader of the Democrats in the U.S. House of Representatives, said that releasing this document, which is now fully public, would somehow be a threat to the national security of the United States.
The intelligence community is vast. It's the CIA, the DNI, the National Defense. Everybody has their element of it, and sources and methods must be protected.
Now, as the debate about the releasing of the memo escalated, Russia most certainly came into the picture. There was a letter that was sent to the owners of Twitter and Facebook urging them to investigate the role of Russian bots or possible Russian bots in the hashtag release the memo. Furthermore, we even saw an escalation of this rhetoric with allegations that Devin Nunes, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee, was himself a Russian agent. Let's take a listen to some of what was said.
Is it possible that the Republican chairman of the House Intel Committee has been compromised by the Russians? Is it possible that they actually have a Russian agent running the House Intel Committee on the Republican side?
I hope that's not the case.
Doesn't his behavior speak of that, though? I mean, I'm not the first person who's raised this. He's behaving like someone who's been compromised.
Now, we're waiting for different reactions to come in, but all eyes are on Washington, D.C., as the 4 pages have been released, and the memo is now public.
Well, let's get some of that reaction now from Daniel McAdams, Executive Director at the Ron Paul Institute. Daniel, good to have you on the programme. Yeah, so there we go. We're a few hours into the memo being released. What's your takeaway points from it?
Well, I think your report covered it very well. This provides very clear evidence that the Democratic Party colluded with like-minded people in the FBI to undermine the Trump candidacy and presidency. They misused the FISA process to do so. It's essentially what we expected. We've gotten some information about it. The real issue, though, the only people who should be shocked about this are people who are living in la-la land thinking that the federal government is full of Boy Scouts. This is what the FISA court does. This is what the FBI has done dozens and dozens of times.
This was always the query, wasn't it? After, will this actually be released? The question was, did the FBI, did the Justice Department, were they biased against the Trump campaign? Has that question been answered now, do you think?
Well, I think it has been. I think the DNC got Steele to do a bogus dossier. They used it. They misled the FISA court, which the FBI has done, according to the FISA court, more than 75 times since 1978, when the court was put in place. It was supposed to make it harder to spy on people. The FISA court has made it easier. Now we're seeing it only when the elites, only when Trump is a victim. We're talking about the FISA courts. But yes, indeed, that does look like what happened. It also completely undermines people like Adam Schiff, the representative from California, who was one of the chief movers behind the whole Russiagate idea. He was desperate for this information not to get out. He said the world would end if it gets out. And now that it's out, he says, well, it's just a nothing burger. So it really undermines the narrative of the Russiagate people.
I'm just looking at some of the reaction to what you could say, I suppose, is the other side. Some of the Democrats saying the FBI was investigating both the Trump and Clinton campaigns in 2016, but kept quiet only about the Trump investigation. Does that therefore undermine claims that there was a conspiracy against Trump? That's what they're pointing out. Your thoughts on that?
No, I think it has to do with the zeal with which the investigations were carried out. We know that they sat on information from on the Hillary Clinton's issue for those 3 critical weeks. We know much more about it, but it has to do with the zeal. We know that these FBI agents were compromised by their own political biases, and not just passively. Everyone has a political view. They were actively motivated to do things, to make things happen, to undermine the will of the American voter.
The consequences of the memo's release, what do you think they're going to be now?
Well, there will be a lot of politicization, of course, of the issue. The sad thing that will not happen is revisiting the issue of FISA. Now, I think here's one of the real crimes, and this has to do with Devin Nunes and the Republicans as well. They all knew about FISA abuses. They knew in detail about FISA abuses before they reauthorized Section 702 just a few weeks ago. They knew all this stuff, but they chose to keep it secret from us, the American people, so they could continue spying on the rest of us. Unfortunately, we will not see this issue resolved. It'll be devolved into a political fight. Yeah,
I'm just looking at some of the other reaction to this. Some notable Democrats saying that if Donald Trump uses the memo to fire DOJ and FBI officials, that is going to be an obstruction to justice. How do you assess that claim?
Well, I think right now they're desperate and in damage control. They're trying to spin this to their advantage. Certainly, I think the president is justified with what we've seen in this 4-page memo of saying this was essentially a covert operation. The intelligence community colluded with people who wanted to prevent me from becoming president. And if this is the kind of banana republic that the U.S. is going to have, not that this is unprecedented, but it is out in the open, just like when Snowden revelations came. We knew they were spying on us, but Snowden's revelations put it in front of us. And so now that we know that the intelligence community is actively involved in elections, what kind of a country are we going to be? That's the question we should be asking. Do you think big heads are going to roll here? Do you foresee the FBI director able to survive this? Is he going to be sacked, resign, or stay in his position, do you think? I think there will have to be some people sacrificed in this. The worst thing that will happen is that they'll form another commission and talk about reform, because what that means is they'll be sweeping this under the rug. There's a chance for some real reform of the FISA process, of the idea of who we are as a society being surveilled by our government, whether you're the president or just some average guy. I hope these issues are the ones that are looked at and visited now that this info is out. And just on the one of the big aspects of this entire case, what do you think will be the impact on the investigations now into allegations of collusion between Trump and Russia? What happens in that regard? Well, anyone who's sane, and I guess that may be few of us these days, will see that the whole thing has been blown out of the water, this whole insane fantasy of Russian bots. People like Senator McCain now are so desperate, and he was involved in this dossier, don't forget. He's saying that anyone now who's criticizing the FBI is doing Putin's bidding. This is what he tweeted earlier today. I think these people are desperate. But anyone, again, who is not insane, who can look at this rationally, whether you're not a Donald Trump supporter, which I am certainly not a supporter, will look at this and say, this blows it out of the water. This fiction now should be put back on the shelf because we've seen the movie and we don't like it.
From the clear, coherent and sane Daniel McAdams, Executive Director at the Ron Paul Institute. Daniel, thanks as always.